Okay, hey everyone, so today we'll be unpacking a piece of absolutely defensive wizardry that Magnus Carlsen just displayed here in the 2023 FIDE World Blitz Championship. It is round 3 and he is playing with the black pieces against Maxim Taruk. So let's dive straight into the game. White opens up with e4 and Magnus, being Magnus, is always going to be pushing for sidelines. He does not want to have theoretical battles. And Magnus, being Magnus, tries to immediately get the game into obscure sidelines. He does not want to be having theoretical battles with opponents that are considerably lower rated than him. White takes the opportunity to grab as much space as he can in the center, and we quickly transpose into an advanced French structure with the central pawns all locked up. Black lashes out with c5, typical in the advanced French, c3, reinforcing his center. So the immediate bishop d7 here, very creative from Magnus, with a6 included. He is not rushing to develop his knight to c6. Instead, he is looking to immediately exchange off that light squared bishop, as any player who is familiar with French structures would know how much of a bad child that light squared bishop is for black. So Magnus just trying to immediately exchange that piece off. Knight f3, Magnus exchanges in the center and places his bishop straight out there on b5, looking for an exchange of that piece. White castles, and we see knight to c6. a3, this is a typical plan in the French defense for white as he looks to expand on the queen side. Knight a7 from Magnus, developing his knight. Knight c3, putting pressure on that bishop, so Magnus exchanges it off and white recaptures. Magnus jumps into f5, an absolutely glorious square for that knight. And anytime that white looks to potentially kick that knight off from that post, he is weakening his king's position. Bishop to g5, attacking the queen. Bishop e7, and we see an exchange of bishops. So this position looks fairly tame at this stage. We only have 2 sets of minor pieces aside. We have the rooks on the board as well. The kings look fairly safe from both sides as well. Little do you guys know just how crazy and tactical this game is going to become. So let's fast forward a bit and get to the action. Rook c1 and knight h4. Magnus is looking to simplify the game even further with more exchanges of pieces. We see an exchange, and f4 here from white. Good on you, Maxim, going after Magnus. He is not afraid. He is looking to launch an attack and push those pawns. Let's see how Magnus responds here. And he castles into it. Gee, this is starting to look like some of my blitz games where I just get rolled over on the king side. So, gee, what is Magnus's defensive idea here? And rook to f3. Gee, so white is not afraid here. He is launching his attack. He's got ideas of doubling up on the f-file. That rook can swing across, position itself against either the king or the queen. So there are a lot of ideas here for white. Not only that, but in this very position, there is actually a deadly threat already. So white is threatening to move his rook over to h3, where his queen and rook would both line up against h7 with a mate threat. So that absolutely has to be dealt with. And Magnus plays g6 to block that diagonal. White doubles up, bringing his other rook into the game. And Magnus very calmly develops to c8. I would be getting very nervous playing black in this position here, just looking at the attacking potential that there is. So let's see how Magnus just very calmly diffuses this situation and blows things open in his favor, actually. So white swings his rook out to h3. He wants to launch his attack. Magnus brings his queen back to d8, and from here it proves to be a very important launch pad for his defensive or counter-attacking measures, as we will see. And f5 from white. Unbelievable. This guy does not care that he's playing against Magnus Carlsen. He launches his f-pawn up the board, looking to open lines, looking to get his pieces into the game. Unbelievable. I would be absolutely terrified here as black. This looks really dangerous. There could be ideas of getting the pawn into f6, getting the queen relocated there, potential sacrifices against h7 as well. How does Magnus diffuse this situation? He plays queen to b6, a counter-attacking move, with pressure on d4. And not only that, the queen x-rays the white king. So in this position here, black is also threatening to take on e5 with his knight, as this pawn is pinned due to the queen's placement. Rook to h7. Unbelievable. What is happening here? This looks absolutely terrifying. What is going on? Magnus simply takes the rook, and white swings his queen across into the action. Now this is absolutely terrifying for me. If I were playing this as black in a blitz game of all things, I would be absolutely terrified. Look at this. We've got a half-open file with the queen against the king. We've got the possibility of this pawn finding itself on f6 and the queen infiltrating and delivering checkmate. This would absolutely terrify me as black. How does black manage to get out of this situation? He simply drops his king back. What was his idea? How was he going to prevent this simple continuation of f6 with white threatening to checkmate? What was Magnus's idea? On the surface of it, it might look like black is completely busted, but there is this incredible resource. We first take on d4 with check, and after the king gets out of the way, we bring our queen up to d2, where the white queen has lost her infiltration point. And not only that, e5 is also under threat. And if e5 falls, then the entire attacking construction falls apart as well. So an absolutely incredible resource for Magnus to see. Not only that, but we have to appreciate that going all the way back to this position here, when Magnus played queen to b6, it's a risky move, but he would have seen, so in playing his queen out to b6, at this stage in the game, he would have seen that he had this defensive resource to prevent that infiltration from the queen. So let's see how the game unfolds. He took on h7, the queen gave the check. He calmly drops back to g8, knowing that he has this defensive resource up his sleeves. White sees it as well, so he tries to bail out with a perpetual check, but Magnus sees everything. He sees that it is actually not a perpetual check. He takes on d4, centralizing the queen, and this piece here ends up being one of the key points as to why this is not a perpetual check for white. The king gets out of the check, and Magnus calmly recaptures on g6. Now this was white's entire idea. His idea was that he can slide his queen along these light squares and give a perpetual check. So on the surface of it, it does look like it's going to be a perpetual check. How on earth does black get out of this? So he steps up, we see a check. The queen is staying on this diagonal, so regardless of where black moves, she can keep checking, and black cannot interpose because we have that square well guarded with the rook. So how does Magnus wriggle out of this? He steps up. He moves his king up to h6. He is not afraid to go for a walk with his king. White checks on h3, and Magnus continues marching forward with his king. So now we can see the brilliance of this move here. The queen on d4 has the ability of interposing herself and blocking the incoming checks. He tries checking on g3, Magnus interposes, another check on e3, and Magnus steps aside. No more checks from the white queen. We see an exchange of rooks. h3, hitting the queen, and rook to f1 check. An absolutely brilliant finish to the game. In this position, Maxim resigned, with the point being that if he moves his king out of the check, we have queen to f4 here, forcing the queens off, and that would be an easily winning endgame. So what an absolutely incredible piece of defensive wizardry here by Magnus Carlsen, to be able to just so calmly parry off this incredibly dangerous looking attack with a launch of the kingside pawns, with all of the heavy artillery lined up against his king. He finds these incredible tactical resources, absolute incredible defensive wizardry. So there you guys have it. I hope that you enjoyed this game as much as I did.